Hi everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to yet another episode of our popular talk show, Sydney Social Live. Now, as you all know, this is a one of its kind, thought-provoking talk show where we put the spotlight on a lot of hidden realities of modern day social circles. Why do I call them hidden realities? Because while a lot of people are struggling with these issues, not many are talking about them, except us here at Sydney Social Live. What is the purpose of this talk show? The purpose is to spark important conversations, to promote positivity, and to foster a community that is accepting and non-judgmental. As you all know, each week I have a special guest who appears on the show, and you've all been waiting with bated breath for this special guest. We have none other than the one and only Charles Thomson.
Namaste and greetings all, and I'm absolutely delighted to be on Nim's show, and it's really wonderful. One, she's a business migrant, but two, women's empowerment. It's so important.
I'm super excited, Charles, to have you on the show. I hope you are as excited as I am.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Fabulous. I'm going to read out a little bit about you, which is really funny because practically everyone in Sydney knows you.
Oh, I'm not sure about that, but anyway.
And a lot of India knows you.
Okay.
But we can't proceed without a formal introduction.
Sure.
For the handful that may not be familiar with who you are.
Sure.
Sounds
sure.
good?
Yes, fine.
All right, so let's read out a little bit about Charles and his journey so far before we dive in. Charles, after topping his school exams in Australia at the age of 13, traveled by himself to India and spent 11 years in Bihar at Yoga Institute. Given the disruptions after Indira Gandhi's death, most foreigners in 1985-86 received the Quit India notice and had to leave within 48 hours. Now an adult, having spent his youth in Bihar, had to adjust to life in Australia. Charles completed in 1 year, Year 10 certificate with straight A's. He taught yoga and meditation at ABC, Macquarie, UTS, and Sydney University. Charles was also one of the first to introduce a Thai restaurant in Sydney back in the late 1990s.
That's right. Yes.
Early 2000s, yes?
Yep.
Charles has also done a lead role in a Marathi movie. He's also made an appearance in Marathi TV serials, romantic serials I believe they're called, and in Hindi TV serials and movies as well.
Yes.
Charles has also helped grow Josh Talks, which is India's equivalent to TED Talks, and I've heard a lot of the Josh Talks, so kudos to you on that. And there's a documentary being made on Charles, which is called Bihari Lal, the Australian Wanderer. Now, this is a very brief bio because I know you've done a whole heap more than all of this. I've got my first question ready for you.
Yes.
But before that, I just want to make sure that the audio is clear. So my friends, those of you who are watching, let me know if you can't hear us clearly. Now is the time. We don't want you to miss out on any of the amazing things that Charles is going to share with us today. So hopefully all is well. Let's get started. Now, this is the exciting part, which I'm going to get Charles to do is, Charles, being Aussie, actually speaks better Hindi than many of us who are of Indian heritage. So Charles, मैं आपको मेरा पहला सवाल हिंदी में करने जा रही हूँ. बहुत से लोग आपको बड़े प्यार से बिहारी लाल बुलाते हैं. You are known as बिहारी लाल. तो ये नाम कैसे हुआ, कब हुआ, इसके पीछे की कहानी क्या है?
तो संक्षिप्त में हिंदी में समझाएंगे आपको?
हाँ जी.
हाँ, मैं दिल्ली में था और मुझे फिल्म इंडस्ट्री में जाना था, लेकिन बॉम्बे में नहीं था. तो सारा बिहारी लोग हमको बतलाए कि हर साल एक फिल्म बाजार होता है, मैरिड होटल गोवा, जहाँ सारा प्रोड्यूसर्स डायरेक्टर्स आता है पूरा दुनिया का. तो मैं भी सोचे हम भी पहुँच जाएंगे, लेकिन जब मैं वहाँ पहुँच गया मेरे पास पैसा नहीं था और बिना टिकट अंदर घुसना मना था. तो मैंने सोचा अब मैं क्या करो. तो मैंने जुगाड़ किया. मैं बोला मुझे अंग्रेजी नहीं बोलना है, मुझे खाली हिंदी. और वहाँ सारा स्टाफ मैरिड होटल कोंकणीज था. उनका हिंदी भी टूटा फूटा, लेकिन उन लोग को बड़ा अच्छा लगा. अरे ये गोरा कौन है? तो हमको चुपचाप से होटल के अंदर में हर एक कार्यक्रम में पहुँचा रहा था. तो मेरा पीछे में एक व्यक्ति था, कैमरा लेके जा रहा था और फिल्म, और 2-3 घंटे मेरे पीछे में था। तो अंत में मैं रुक गया, उनसे पूछा आप कौन हैं, आप क्या कर रहा है? तो वो बोला ये तो 2-3 घंटा मैं भी समझने की कोशिश कर रहा है कि मेरे सामने में कौन आदमी है। और वो कौन था? BBC हिंदी। और मुझे भी नहीं मालूम था कि ये पहली बार दिल्ली से उसको बाहर भेजा, उसका पहले वाला मतलब कहानी बनाना, शो बनाना और रेडियो में ऑडियो लगाना है। तो वो देखते देखते वो खुद हमको नाम दिया बिहारी लाल। जब थोड़ा मेरे बारे में जानकारी प्राप्त किया तो हमको बड़ा अच्छा लगा, क्योंकि बिहारी लाल तो एक ठीक है, बंगाली लोग सोचते हैं लाल बिहारी, बाकी तो भगवान कृष्ण जब बच्चा था। और मंदिर बहुत अच्छा मंदिर है और हिंदुस्तान में मथुरा वृंदावन में बिहारी लाल मंदिर,
Right.
मजेदार, तो नाम वहां से मिला।
Wow, what a story. And isn't it amazing how he speaks Hindi? How fluent is that? So you must get a lot of opportunities out here to practice that Hindi, right? And that's why you're still so good at it after all these years.
Oh, actually, this is the funny part. India doesn't understand that except for India, where India maybe English is growing, in the rest of the world it's going. So here in Sydney, when you get on the train, you rarely hear two people speaking in English. You hear Marathi, you hear German, you hear Spanish, you hear Tamil, you hear Hindi. So here, whenever I want to do something, I look for the Indians, speak in Hindi, and my work is done. When normally they're the most difficult, by the way, especially if they become a Sakari Babu here.
Right. Wow, that is an amazing. Tell us about your experience in Bihar.
Oh, so when I went, and that's in the early 70s, it wasn't as if there was electricity. Kabhi kabhi aa jata tha. It was like going from the 20th to the 19th to the 18th to the 17th century. It was very primitive, very simple, and still today when I think about it, it's almost like I was watching a documentary. It was just so austere. People were so poor. They were happy, but extremely poor, and lived a very, very simple life.
Oh, okay. And you started learning the language pretty much from day one?
No, because the whole of India is trying to learn English. So they want to speak to you in English. My Hindi only took off when I returned to Australia.
Wow.
I don't know how, why, something clicked in the brain.
Yeah,
Yes.
I have to say, and I've been, Charles is a very dear friend, and whenever we meet, I insist on speaking in Hindi. And I must say, he often uses words in Hindi that I have not even heard. I was saying, how do you do it? It boggles the mind. And you know a bit of Sanskrit as well, I believe?
Yeah, I know some Sanskrit, but मैं ज़्यादा पढ़ा लिखा नहीं हूँ. That much I can say.
Oh, we don't believe that. So Charles, we have some questions lined up for you
Sure.
at Sydney Social Live, and as you know, we do talk about topics related to social life,
Yes.
social circles
Yes.
in Sydney. You did mention that a lot of your friends from India might be tuning in as well.
Sure.
And I'm sure they will be quite interested in getting these insights
Yes.
into social life in Sydney.
Yes.
So where are the people who are going to say hi to us? I'm always waiting. So say hi, Charles. Hi, Nim. If you've got any questions to ask Bihari Lal, now is the time. Now Meena Sundar has written a message. She says, amazing,
Yes.
so nice to hear speaking the language when our kids here are still learning. Isn't that right? Like, kids here are still learning, and look at you, like.
Oh yeah, and it's so important to learn another language other than English. Because the
Absolutely.
moment you can speak a second language, or you can get out of the English framework, it's very easy to learn multiple languages.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so incredibly important.
So friends, if you are listening in, we want to know that you're listening in. I would love to know which part of the world you're listening in. So please do say hi, and if possible, let us know which city you're tuning in from. We will do our best to answer the questions that you ask during the session, but if not, Charles and I will go through them after the live and
Sure.
get back to you as well. So fabulous. All right, let's get to our first question for you for the day. So Charles, as you know, I'm a migrant from India.
Yes.
I came to Australia 28 years ago.
Right, yes.
And out here in Australia, the Indian diaspora is massive.
Oh, and it's growing
And it's growing.
exponentially. Oh, yeah.
And it's growing. So heaps of migrants.
Yes.
A thing that I've often thought about is, what are some things that hold migrants back? Now, when you come from an Eastern country, for example, to
Yes.
a Western country,
Yep.
there are so many things that migrants are not aware of,
Yes.
right? Which then can hold them back in their journey. In your travels, and you've worked closely with the Indian diaspora, you yourself are an Aussie. I think of you as almost Indian anyway.
Okay.
But what are some things that hold migrants back, and what are some solutions to those things?
Well, actually, I've worked with a number of migrant communities here in Sydney. By having Thai restaurants, most of my customers were from Southeast Asia and many places. So, it's not just with the Indian community. When I talk about Indians, I mean the Indian subcontinent. That
Yes.
means Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and even Pakistan, Afghanistan, but also the rest of Southeast Asia. So some common mistakes that are very common here. Whenever you have a problem, you'll notice that whoever's creating the problem, it could be an energy supplier, an airline, the post office, anybody, they always write to you and ask you to ring. Never ring back. Learn to simply write and respond unemotionally. The moment you do that, you're first in the queue and your problem will be solved very easily. And look, I'll give you a simple example. At the moment, there's this huge debate in Australia about the fact that Qantas is holding some $300, $400, $500 million in deposits during COVID for cancelled tickets. Now, I was taking my mum to Adelaide just as COVID broke out, and we had Jetstar tickets. And they wrote back to me, flights are cancelled, everything's cancelled, keep your money as a credit. If you have any problem, ring us. I wrote back articulately and said, no way, I want a refund. And they gave me a refund immediately. I didn't spend half an hour waiting to speak to a call centre. So it's really important, whatever your problem is, and you do it unemotionally and simply write. And it's amazing here how that resolves problems. And I find so many migrants get themselves all caught up because they just don't know how to respond otherwise. And you just get worn down by picking up the phone and waiting for somebody to pick up and talk some sense to you.
Right.
So that's one that's very important.
So you're saying that rather than hop onto the phone and wait in queue forever,
Yes,
just write an email.
exactly. Another wonderful example, because I travel a lot in Southeast Asia. Sometimes I've come back and I've found that somebody took out $5,000 from my account from Germany, not Liberia or Nigeria, but from Germany, and then somebody from France, and then somebody from Trinidad. I never ring. I get on the email instantaneously, I write it all, and I send it to the bank. And what does the credit card company do? Immediately put a hold, and in the end they refund the money to me. It's no longer my problem, it's their problem. Because I've articulated that I've been managing my account correctly. So, you see, that whole art of learning to respond in writing, and I actually learned that in India, because not now, but previously in the 70s and 80s, it was the British Raj, it was the red tape. Everything had to be in triplicate with carbon paper, which most people may have never seen, typewriters, which most people have never seen, and tupper stamps. So I learned all of that. So that's really helped. And email is such a simple and easy tool. So that's one. There's a second one that's very, very important too. In countries like Australia, insurance. Simple, low-cost policies for insurance. They work. And once you pay them over a couple of years, they discount the amount. So if you are burgled, or if your car is stolen, or whatever happens in your life, they're very reasonable premiums. You pay them, and they look after you.
So here I guess we're saying that insurance is something that can be often overlooked.
Many, many times new migrants, not just from India, the whole of Southeast Asia and even South America and Africa, they're here. They just didn't think, because maybe in their own country they've never bothered to have insurance, or they had it and they had a bad experience. But here, pretty well, as long as you're honest, insurance can help you profoundly. It just, when you have that tragic moment, and it does happen to all of us, the insurance kicks in.
Yeah.
So that's the second one, which is a very important one. The third one, which is really interesting, which takes some mindset to get around. We have this amazing thing in countries like Australia, where if you actually have done something wrong, if you actually confess and explain that you've done wrong and apologize, half of the problem's gone.
Absolutely.
If you hide it and refuse to declare it, it just gets bigger. But the system here is worked on that we, the organization or whoever you're working with shouldn't catch you out. You should be brave enough to admit your mistake and honestly explain your circumstances.
Yeah.
And I'll give you one typical migrant example. I had this Italian gentleman, and this Italian gentleman, I was helping him, and he had a problem with the immigration here. And the problem was that he never reported that in the UK he had a police report against him, and he'd been locked up overnight. So I sat him down and said, tell me the story. It's his best friend's birthday. They went to a pub. He got drunk. So then when he went out, he couldn't operate the ATM and it didn't work. So then he just picked up the local bicycle, sat on it, started riding and hit a policeman right in the most unfortunate part of the policeman's anatomy. This gentleman became so angry, he took the bike and him and put him in jail overnight. But we wrote the story beautifully. We put it in. Problem solved.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really important to understand that this, declaration of what you've done wrong is incredibly important.
So ये मैंने professional life में भी देखा है, in offices and workplaces, that often the tendency is to not take ownership, right?
Right.
And then it's about shifting the blame, finding someone to blame.
That's
and
right.
that is something we need to remember, particularly when we're here in Australia, that take ownership.
Yes.
And it's, it's not a big deal, but at least we can focus our energy on solving the problem rather than constantly trying to say, I didn't do it.
Absolutely. And just a last word on that. I've met many people from Southeast Asia and India who feel that their English is very high and very good, but they forget one point, and that is ucharan, pronunciation.
Yeah.
The rest of Southeast Asia, when they hear the Indian accent, they struggle to understand what you've said. So please, even if you think that you've spoken articulately in English, the other person may still not have understood you.
Yes.
Right, and that's really important in communications.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because people don't want to lose face.
I think that's a great point and something that, we all have to mull over. Having said that, you've got some people who have asked some questions.
Yes.
Meena Sundar says, especially when elderly parents travel, it is essential to have adequate travel and health insurance plan to cover any health issues.
Absolutely. And the other point I would put to you, and this really drives me around the bend, if you're sending elderly parents, send them on a direct flight. Don't save $50 or $100 and put them on some other airline and they've got to get off the plane, run around the airport and get onto another plane. It's just not fair.
And it's they're anxiety ridden as it is because you're traveling
Exactly.
to an unknown place, and then to have to constantly switch flights, it is unnerving.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Yeah, so that's something to keep in mind.
Sure.
So Samay Jain, hi. Samay says, wow, Nim Gholkar, such a brilliant insight to hear from Charles today at Sydney Sunday Social Live. So we're very excited to have you here.
Thank you.
And there's another thing, especially the points that we should prefer communication via emails rather than phone calls when raising issues. So yes, people are agreeing with you and saying that is a good point indeed. And let's just see. Shilpa says, hi Charles, it's really great and I feel really proud when we hear an Australian speaking Hindi. Jai ho, good on you.
Jai Bharat.
That is awesome. All right, so that's some great tips. So anyone who's watching here who is a new migrant or who knows some loved ones who are new migrants to Australia, Charles has raised some very, very important points. So please do think about it and do leave your comments, do share your insights. That brings me to the next question and the last one. And the reason this is the last one is because I know you've got a lot to say about this.
Okay.
And it's about body language.
Okay.
All right, which is something I could talk about and listen to forever.
Yes.
And when it's coming from someone like Charles, I know that there are going to be some funny moments here.
Sure.
So, Charles, when a migrant moves to a country like Australia, there is room for so many faux pas
Yes.
because of the cultural gap. I mean,
Absolutely.
I know in my 28 years I've done some things that back then I was horrified, but now I look back and I roll my eyes and think, what was I thinking of?
Yes.
Right? Because, of course, when you come from India, it's very different, and you come to Australia, and they say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do.
Yes.
But when you don't know what you're supposed to do,
Yes.
it can lead to some very, very awkward moments.
Yes.
What do you have to say about this?
It's a really fascinating subject, because if we look at it, there's two ways of looking at it. And funnily enough, India and Australia are the leaders in understanding body language. Why do I say that? In India, if you go back and if you follow a yoga practitioner, we use what are called mudras. So these are special hand movements that we use that have an effect on the body. Mm-hmm. In Australia, for some reason, maybe because we started from convicts, so we don't have a class issue, people have been a lot more aware of trying to understand the person in front of them by their hand movements. And because we've had, particularly like the Italians and the Greeks, they like to express themselves and put their hands out. So what that's done is people have become experts, and people are actually trained. Even our prime ministers here in Australia are trained to understand body gestures and body movements and what they mean. But look, I'm going to tell you a delightful story, an experience that I've had with the Indian community here. Now, all the diplomats are being sent to another post. All the people who are working at the Indian consulates have gone. It's a whole new bunch. So please, it's nothing to do with the current bunch. I'm giving that proviso. 3 or 4 years ago, I was invited to Hindi Divas. Hindi Divas, for those who don't know what the word Divas, is when we celebrate once a year the language of Hindi. So I arrived a little bit late at the consulate here in Sydney, and I sat at the back, and there were about 300 or 400 people sitting in front of me.
Is that all?
That's all. And I didn't count them, but it was a full room. You know that room, it was full. It was absolutely packed. And then up on the dais were the consulate people. Now, the people on the floor, the Indians attending, what language were they speaking? Hindi. But the people on the dais, what language were they speaking? English. And I thought, this is madness. So I shouted from behind, Azadi ho gaya, देश का आजादी हो गया 75 साल से, चिंता मत करो, अब हिंदी बोल सकता है. So at that very moment when I said that, and because everybody's back was towards me, so they couldn't see the person saying it, I immediately knew by looking at people's body language that everybody was thinking there's either some BJP or some RSS person sitting at the back. Because what happened was everybody's shoulders came up a bit. And everybody came a bit upright. They became annoyed. Why is this person? And saying this, and you could see the perplexion on those poor consulate people, right? Of course, when we had a tea break and we had chai and samosa, everybody nearly broke. It was just too much for them. But that was one part of body language. Now the other, I've helped. Now, what they teach us, for example, if you're in a negotiation with people, once a person knows this, the effectiveness has dropped. And these are generalizations too, I must mention this. But whenever you're in negotiations with a person, or you go to see a real estate agent to sign a bond, or whatever, you're in a bank discussing something, the moment somebody puts their hand around their mouth, this is an indication of them being a dishonest person. Now, why? And the reasoning is beautiful. Imagine you're a 3 or 4 year old child and you've just taken the ice cream from the fridge and finished it. And mum asks you, and you've got ice cream all over your face, have you eaten the ice cream? Now at that age, you can't lie because you don't know. So what do? You put your hand over your mouth. So this is a natural instinct when people are not telling the truth or they're nervous to put their hand on the mouth. Now, there are exceptions. I've noticed particularly with the Nepalese, and I've worked a lot with the Nepalese community, that they've got nothing to do with lying, but they'll be touching their mouth. So I've had to point out, I've told them, put your hand out. I've asked them, bring your hand out. The second one, whenever you're in a company room or you're with work colleagues or you're in a university or wherever you are, and you're giving a presentation, and you've got a group of people sitting in front of you, the moment you see a person sitting like this, it's been scientifically proven that they're absorbing maybe 20% of what you're saying, and 80% is just going from one ear throughout the other ear. So get them out of this position. Either ask them to give you a glass of water, put a pen in their hand, ask everybody to clap or put their hands above their head. Do something to break that position. Now, another one that I'll show you in Australia that's very typical. We had one particular Prime Minister, and she was a female Prime Minister, and her name was Julia Gillard. Now, I haven't noticed it with the other Prime Ministers, but maybe they also do it. And of course, this wasn't natural, she was trained. But when she would give a speech, she would come up and throw her hands out this way. Throw her hands out this way. Now, why would she do that? Because subconsciously, up until say 50 or 100 years ago, in all societies of the world, whenever you met somebody for the first time, you were apprehensive that they may be holding a knife or a sword. So you were looking at that person because you don't know them, and there could be an altercation. So the moment you see somebody put their hands out like this, subconsciously it sends a message to your brain that you can trust them. Right? So watch our pollies, because our politicians, doesn't matter which party they are, they've got people training them how to speak, where to put their hands, what to do, etc. Right? So that's very, very important. Now, when I tell things, I like to tell stories. And I've noticed that I like to use my hands. And even though the hands may not be communicating much, they engage the eyes, they engage the person watching me. So there's a connection there. So that's where hand gestures and body movements are very important. The others, so I'll give you one anecdote in my Thai restaurants. Occasionally my staff were Thai, they're at university, and they'd be my waiters or waitress, and they'd come up and they were upset. They said, there's a problem with the customer. And I said, what happened? And they said, your food tastes like crap, or your food tastes like shit. I won't say the word, I don't say those words. But I said, what were they doing? Oh, they were licking the plate. So in Australia, we have this humour of speaking opposites. So it's really important to look at the body mannerisms to see if somebody's trying to take the mickey out of you.
That is a great thing, but that brings me to Aussie humour actually.
Yes.
Talk to us about Aussie humour, because it's something that a lot of migrants find very difficult to understand.
Okay. It's a dying breed, because after all, Caucasians are a dying breed. Okay? There's more and more migrants, less and less Caucasians in Australia, and that's a fact. But, okay. Now, because we actually came, traditionally, a lot of us came from convicts, and therefore we came from the bottom class, not the top class. So we've had a very different outlook to life, and therefore what happens is we just say what comes out of our head. In a sophisticated family or a sophisticated culture, people at the top are very good at telling you something completely different to what they should be telling you. You know, it's the art of the gab. It's like a lawyer convincing you that that table is black, but it's actually white. And in the end, you believe it's black, right? So that's a sophistication. So Australian society initially was very, very simple.
Yeah.
And that's where that Australian humour came from. You know, so even now, you know, we speak in opposites. And it's quite refreshing, right? Unfortunately today, because we're gender neutral, we're not allowed to say this, we're not allowed to say that, it's slowly creeping out of our system. But it's something wonderful. And another thing that I really love, and you'll observe this in Australia, I haven't picked this up in other countries. You may notice that particularly in banks and companies, they'll have one day of the week where you don't have to wear a uniform. You can just dress casually. Why do they do that? Just so that people feel more relaxed with each other. You know, they're not putting on airs and dressing up in a certain manner to show off to their peers. And this is where the other bit that I absolutely love. We couldn't give a stuff about brands. We like quality products, but the brand name doesn't matter. But that puts us out of step, not just with India, but the whole of Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ever get the chance, QVB has some very, very posh brands of all crystals, you name it. And whenever they have a sale, spot the Caucasian. You'll be lucky to see one. They're all new migrants wanting a deal.
Just to revert to the humour,
yes.
How does one handle this quintessential Aussie humor if you're not Aussie and you don't understand it? Are there any things you can tell?
Don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah.
And try to smile, even if you're not supposed to be smiling.
Yeah.
The moment you smile at another person, not a young male, young Australian men, and I'm talking about the ages of 16 to 24, haven't worked out their personality, so they have to get drunk before they can express themselves. So girls, I'm talking with a 16 to 20-year-old Australian male, forget that group, but beyond that group, smile. And you know, like, I like walking, you know, and I'm walking down a street, and we do this everywhere, and you see some elderly lady or elderly gentleman in the yard, and you just look at them and smile. They want to call you in and give you a cup of tea. Right? It's such a and they've got a beautiful home. It's such a lovely connection.
Yeah.
Don't be. Now, I will give one example of how I thought an Indian migrant did beautifully with racism. Right? And I thought this is an absolute gem. I won't mention his name, but he's from South India. He won't mind saying that. And he's completely in dark complexion. He was in Woolies. We all go to Woolies. He's standing in line. And the lady in front of him looks at him and feels very uncomfortable. And he honestly says that he looks ugly. Okay? And she turned her head the other way. He just ignored it. He was going with his life. But she had a 4-year-old or 3-year-old little girl with her. And she was fascinated. And she kept turning to look at him. So he just smiled and said, I look like chocolate, don't I? You like chocolate? And she says, I love chocolate. And guess what the mother did? She turned around and smiled. And said something nice to him. So it's really important when people are being, or when we misunderstand, or when we understand somebody else is putting us down, or being unkind, or even giving a derogatory remark, if we're positive and smile back, it changes things. Suddenly that person wants to know you. Because everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to be around positive people.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be around miserable people, including family members.
No, that's fascinating insights, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That brings us actually to our rapid fire round.
Okay.
I just want to make sure there are no comments that we haven't seen yet. So just give me one tick. Meena says great information. Jai Bharat. Oh, Shilpa liked the sound of Jai Bharat. What else? So keep those comments coming, everyone. We love to hear from you. All right. So some very quick one-word answers kind of thing, but feel free to elaborate. आपको चाय ज़्यादा पसंद है या कॉफी?
सवेरे चाय, शाम को नहीं माफ कीजिए, सवेरे कॉफी, शाम को चाय, और शाम को गरम चाय, मसाला चाय.
और आप अदरक भी डालते हैं या?
हाँ, कभी-कभी अदरक भी डालता है, हर्बल टीज भी पीता है, खावा भी पीता है, अरे दुनिया भर, उलोंग सब. लेकिन हाँ, और कभी-कभी दिन में अगर हमको थोड़ा थकावट नींद आ रहा है, तो खाना मसाला चाय पीना है, अदरक वाला है, वो वाला, हाँ, वो.
Wow, अच्छा. Are you a morning person?
Absolutely.
Or a night owl?
I love to see sunrise.
अच्छा.
Yeah.
तो आप सुबह कितने बजे उठते हैं usually?
Normally, I try to open my eyes, and I'm fortunate enough to live on the northern beaches, so I can see the whole horizon when I wake up. I love to open my eyes and see that orange on the sunrise. I just feel that's a really positive way to wake up. And the other little tip I'll give you is, often I'll have lorikeets or a couple of cockatoos looking in at me too.
Oh.
So I feel very appreciated.
That's nice. अब आप हमें next few जवाब हिंदी में दीजिए please, क्योंकि हमारी audience is very thrilled to hear you speak in Hindi, and we all know how your love affair with India, how much you love India. अच्छा, आपको movies ज़्यादा पसंद है या किताबें?
पहले हम बहुत किताब पढ़ते थे, बहुत, और पूरा दुनिया का किताब. अब मूवीज देखने का शौक है, लेकिन अभी इस वक्त में हमको, और आप लोग को भी शायद मालूम है, इतना चॉइस, इतना वैरायटी. पुराना जापानीज, पुराना कोरियन, पुराना इजराइल का, ये सब पुराना हिंदुस्तान का, वो सब देखने का मजा आता है. ये जो कार्टून वाला कैरेक्टर्स जो हॉलीवुड, और ये जो कहानी रोज रोज बनाता है बॉलीवुड, वो सब देखने का मस्त नहीं है. और मैं भी फिल्म फेस्टिवल्स होस्ट करता है,
अच्छा,
हिंदुस्तान में दो प्रकार, एक इंटरनेशनल एक अलग से संस्कृत फिल्म फेस्टिवल्स, वो दोनों राजस्थान। तो 8 फिल्म्स, और जो मतलब अगर मैं रोज सकता है कोई फिल्म देख करके मैं तो बहुत खुश है।
Right.
लेकिन एक बात मैं आपको बतलाता है कि जब भी आप कोई फिल्म देखता है, 2 चीज अगर हो जाता है, आपको मालूम है कि ये फिल्म बहुत जबरदस्त है। सबसे पहले आप भूल जाता है कि आप बैठ रहा है और फिल्म देख रहा है, मतलब इतना इंटेंस कहानी है कि अंत में जब फिल्म खत्म हो जाता है आपको थोड़ा सा ऐसा बैठना पड़ता है, क्योंकि आप हिला नहीं उसको देखने में। और दूसरा, आपका आंख में थोड़ा पानी निकला, तब ऐसा फिल्म देखेंगे कोई भी भाषा में, सबटाइटल अंग्रेजी जो भी है, बड़ा अच्छा बात है।
वेरी नाइस, बहुत बढ़िया आंसर। आपकी हिंदी तो मेरी हिंदी से भी बेहतर है। अच्छा, आपका फेवरेट मील क्या है?
हाँ, मैं शाकाहारी हूँ। आजकल हिंदुस्तानी सब नॉन वेज होता जा रहा है, और अंग्रेज धीरे धीरे सब वीगन वेजिटेरियन क्या क्या बनता जा रहा है। तो लोग हमसे पूछता है अब वेजिटेरियन वीगन क्या करता है? हम बोलते हैं बिना चेहरा का कोई भी चीज खिलाओ, बिना चेहरा कोई भी चीज खिलाओ, हम खाने के तैयार है। वो पहली चीज है। दूसरा, हम वेजिटेरियन में, हम वीगन नहीं है, लेकिन वीगन खाना तो खाएगा। हम 2 पसंद करता है, एक थाई वेजिटेरियन, इंडियन वेजिटेरियन। थाई बिल्कुल अलग है हिंदुस्तानी वेजिटेरियन से। वो ऐसे चीज बनाता है, ऐसे सब्जी इस्तेमाल करता है, मशरूम इस्तेमाल करते हैं, बैम्बू, जो हिंदुस्तान में कभी मिला नहीं है, तो वो भी एक अलग है हिंदुस्तान। लेकिन हिंदुस्तान में सबसे मजेदार मेरे लिए क्या है? पंजाबी थाली वेज, दक्षिण भारतीय रेस्टोरेंट।
इन अ साउथ इंडियन रेस्टोरेंट?
हाँ, दक्षिण भारतीय रेस्टोरेंट। क्यों? क्योंकि दक्षिण भारतीय थोड़ा हल्का, इतना ज़्यादा घी नहीं लगाता है, और रसम डालता है और थोड़ा दही, तो वो मुझे बहुत आनंद आता है उसको खाने में।
पंजाबी थाली इन अ साउथ इंडियन
हाँ, हाँ,
रेस्टोरेंट, वाओ, आई लव दैट। और लास्टली, आपका फेवरेट रेस्टोरेंट कौन सा है सिडनी में? अगर हम मैंने
नहीं, तो लोग अगर इंडियन के बारे में पूछता है तो हैरिस पार्क चले जाओ, वहाँ हर एक प्रकार हिंदुस्तानी रेस्टोरेंट है। इंडियन चाइनीज से लेके के इंडियन दक्षिण भारतीय, इंडियन पंजाबी, इंडियन नेपाली, अरे सब प्रकार का होता है। और अगर थाई तो जाके के थाई टाउन, जैसे लिटिल इंडिया बन गया ना हैरिस पार्क ना, तो सिटी में वहाँ चाइना टाउन में एक जगह है, वहाँ सारा थाई रेस्टोरेंट्स है, और थाई ब्रेकफास्ट भी सर्व करता है। बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग है।
वाओ, ओके, लिटिल इंडिया और फिर द थाई, दोस आर योर।
क्योंकि वहाँ थाई लोग खाना खा रहे हैं, बाकी थाई रेस्टोरेंट्स में, और जनरली जब आप इंडियन रेस्टोरेंट्स आते हैं ना, गोरा लोग खा रहे हैं ना। नहीं, आजकल इतने हिंदुस्तानी हो गए तो हिंदुस्तानी को चिंतन नहीं करना है, लेकिन थाई रेस्टोरेंट में ज़्यादा गोरा खाता है। लेकिन वहाँ चाइना टाउन में जो थाई रेस्टोरेंट्स है, अब देखिए सारा थाई लोग खा रहा है, तो उसमें अलग होता है ना। मैं जब थाई रेस्टोरेंट चलाता था बागोला नॉर्दर्न बीचेस में, 80% of my customers were Caucasian. But when I had my takeaway in the middle of the city for 11 years, 70 to 80% of my customers were Asian. So the food, the menu, the taste had to be completely different to survive.
Wow. Lastly, before we wrap up, do you want to tell our audience, are there any projects, any movies, any soap operas, anything that you've got lined up?
मैं तो हर साल लिटरेचर फिल्म फेस्टिवल्स कर रहा है हिंदुस्तान में, इसमें भी बहुत खुश है। लोग हमको बुला रहे हैं बार बार हिंदुस्तान में कि ये टीवी सीरीज में जाओ, ये में जाओ। अभी मैं थोड़ा सा इसको पीछे रह रहा है, मैं देखता है कोई अमेजिंग प्रोजेक्ट कुछ अलग है, और उसमें मेरे लिए थोड़ा सा चैलेंज है, तो मैं करने का तैयार है। लेकिन वो सेम वाला रूटीन वाला है, तो मुझे इतना शौक नहीं है उसको करने का।
Right. And how often do you visit India?
साल में 2-3 बार।
साल में 2-3 बार?
कार्यक्रम है मेरा ना, राजस्थान में मेरा हमेशा कार्यक्रम होता है, बिहार में मेरा कार्यक्रम होता है, उत्तराखंड में मेरा कार्यक्रम होता है, हिमाचल में भी कार्यक्रम होता है, महाराष्ट्र में कभी कभी, तो जाना ही पड़ता है ना।
That's amazing.
मजा आता है। और वहां से हम जाते हैं नेपाल।
अच्छा।
और वो भी मजेदार, अरे नेपाल। और मुझे बड़ा अजीब लगता है कि हिंदुस्तानी यहाँ भी पूरा दुनिया में जहाँ भी मिलेगा, अगर नॉर्थ इंडियन है उससे पूछो कभी दक्षिण भारत गया, हम खाए जाएंगे, वो सारा थाईलैंड जाएगा, ऑस्ट्रेलिया में रहकर कि थाईलैंड, कैम्बोडिया, वियतनाम जाएगा। अगर आप दक्षिण भारतीय यहाँ मिलेगा, बोलते हैं नॉर्थ इंडिया कभी गया, हिमालय, सिक्किम, हम खाए जाएंगे। कहाँ गया? कैम्बोडिया, बाली, थाईलैंड। अरे राम, ये क्या बात है। खाली आप अपना देश वापस खाली शादी के लिए मत जाओ, रिश्तेदार के लिए मत जाओ, लेह लद्दाख सबसे सुंदर जगह है दुनिया का, 55 मिनट लगता है दिल्ली में, लेकिन मई जून में जाइए, बाकी -30 -40, वो खाली अंग्रेज पागल जाता है उस टेम्परेचर में। सिक्किम जाइए, कश्मीर जाइए, अरे वाह।
I've had to be on my best behavior today. Normally when I'm chatting with Charles, I can't keep a straight face, and even now I'm finding it so hard to stop giggling because the irreverent approach to life itself is so hilarious. Thank you for being so candid.
Sure.
It has been an
a delight.
absolute pleasure. No holds barred chat.
Yes.
And we've covered some very, very important
Oh,
points.
and I'm so happy that because it's rare that I get this opportunity to speak about migration and the problems that people face.
Yes.
And it's a really important thing as we become such a diverse community here in Australia.
And coming from someone like yourself, who is an Aussie but has spent such an integral part of your youth in India, and you continue to spend time in India,
Yes.
you've seen both cultures from close up.
Yep.
And I think you're the best person to share these insights. So thank you for that. Thank you, friends, for listening in and, as always, sharing a slice of your Sunday with us here at Sydney Social Live. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure you've enjoyed listening to Charles. Those of you who missed the first half or whatever you joined late, the recording will be available on the page. So keep watching. Next week, we will be here with yet another guest. Thank you so much. Thank you, Charles.
Namaste, Jai Hind, Aussie, Aussie, Aussie.
See you, everybody. Bye.